Welcome to episode 3 of Living in Jesus. In this episode, we're going to try to understand what the Bible calls the flesh, our nemesis really that we're battling with each and every day. Let's get started. We'd previously said that we need to understand the problem to really understand the solution. Think of it this way. You walk into your doctor's office and you sit down and your doctor just turns to you and says, I have this pill for you. I want you to take it. It's poison, but I think that you need to take it. What are the odds of you taking that pill at that point? You'd probably want a second or third or fourth opinion, right? But what if you walked in and your doctor said to you, we've run some tests and we've discovered you have a unique form of cancer. But here's the good news. It's 100% treatable. You take this pill. It's poison, but it will only kill the cancer cells and you'll be fine. 100% guaranteed. Now what are the odds you taking that pill? Much higher, right? Because now you've understood the problem and you've understood what that solution, the pill, is meant to be. And I think that's probably why so much of our evangelism has failed, is that we haven't really done a great job explaining to people why they need Jesus. And so when we try to evangelize, sometimes they hear us and they say, well, I'm not that bad of a person and I'm okay. And they don't accept Jesus as their answer, even though they need him. And so what we need to do is we need to make sure we understand the problem so that the answer makes sense. And that's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to understand our problem. We saw the problem was more than just, we've sinned and we've blown it. Oh, it's true. The problem really is death. And last video, we talked about what that death looks like. That death that reigns over us, as it says in Romans 5:17. The death that this world was plunged into the moment Adam and Eve ate from the no-no tree, right? The tree of knowledge of good and evil. And we saw that death was more than just that one day physically they would die, although that's true. What we saw was that death permeated their whole being, that death began to impact their spirit. And we saw that death really is just the absence of life. It's the absence of what we need. And so in the core of who we are as a spiritual being, that need to be loved and need to be accepted and approved and have value and significance and belonging and have all of that to be secure. All of that was taken away from Adam and Eve. It doesn't mean that God didn't want to offer it. That's really important to understand. I want you to think about it in this sense that if you've got a power plant and it's providing that electricity, it's providing that power, but unless the appliance is plugged into the wall, it can't accept that electricity. So electricity is there and it's ready to be offered. It just requires to be plugged in. And that's much of what happened with Adam and Eve, is that the power, the life that God wanted to give to mankind is right there. But they chose to disconnect and separate themselves from the source. They unplugged from God. And as a result, they lost out on life. And so death in their spirit, we saw, looks like that sense of being unloved, rejected, not good enough. To be worthless and insignificant, to be alone and insecure. And we said that if we could summarize it with one word, it would be this word shame. That belief that there is something now fundamentally wrong with me and who I am. And because we're experiencing death in the spirit, we're also going to be experiencing death in the soul. And so that means we saw it's going to look like believing lies. And sometimes those lies are very, negative towards yourself, in that sense of shame that I'm not good enough and I'm total failure and I'll never be good enough and everyone's better than me and no one really likes me and I'm going to be all alone. Or maybe it's more on the other side, where it's still fueled by shame. It just looks very differently in the sense that I'm better than everyone else. And now we have that arrogance, that pride that we saw in the Pharisees. That I'm so glad not to be these people because I'm far more successful. And so we see that starting to impact our mind. And it's impacting the will and the poor choices we're making and obviously impacting even our emotions. feeling anxious and frustrated and despair and hopeless and alone. And just all of those feelings there are just experiencing death. And then even in our physical bodies, that yes, our bodies are marching towards death, but we're experiencing death, whether that be the aches and the pains and the illnesses and bodies just breaking down, not being able to do what we want them to do or what we hope they could do or what they used to be able to do. We're experiencing death in our whole being. And that's how Adam and Eve were when they walked out of that garden. Their need for life never changed, but for the first time, they were in need of it. My friend Frank, he likes to call this not the fall of man, but rather the great gasp. And I think that's such a great description of really what took place. You think about that fish in the water. That fish underwater is breathing oxygen, right? The water passes through the gills and the gills extract the oxygen, allowing the fish to breathe. That's pretty much all the marine biology I know, but I know that much. Well, if you were to take that fish out of the water, you haven't removed oxygen from the environment. It's right there. But that fish can't access that oxygen anymore. Instead, now it's separated, it's cut off from it, and that fish begins to choke. That fish is experiencing death. Well, my friend Frank Friedman says that's basically the great gasp. That's exactly what Adam and Eve did. The moment they sinned, they're plucked out of the ocean of God, so to speak. They're plucked out from experiencing and receiving. It's not that God disappears. It's not that God vanishes. He's right there, but they can't access him anymore. Their sin, their choice has separated them from God, and now they're alone. And they can't receive life from him. And so where do they go? Where do they turn? And they turn to one another. They turn to the world around them. And the Bible calls this, or refers to this, living according to the flesh. It's a new term we're introducing. It's a critical term. It's a big term. It's a big source of our problem and understanding why is it that we're not always experiencing this life. Even as new creations, even as people in Christ, what is it that we're up against? And the problem that we're facing is this thing called the flesh. Now we're gonna dive into that and explain it in a lot more detail in terms of the dynamic of the war that's going on in a later video. But right now I want to understand what is the flesh in some generic ways and some simple ways, and what is it is trying to do. Unfortunately, this term flesh has been confusing for a lot of people because for a time, one of the major Bibles translated this word flesh as sinful nature. That was the NIV Bible. They've since changed it and gone back to translating it as the flesh. But the problem is we've had 50 plus years of that Bible, and every translation since then have adopted that terminology, sinful nature, even though scripture doesn't really talk about a sinful nature. And so what ends up happening is that sinful nature, it causes a couple problems. One is that I begin to relate the flesh to something that's moral. Meaning that if it's overtly sinful, it's of the flesh. And if it's not overtly sinful, then it's probably not of the flesh. So for example, lying, cheating, listening to country music, just kidding. But all those, sinful things, the lying and cheating and getting drunk and sleeping around, and that's clearly immoral and that's of the flesh. But then doing good things and helping the poor and serving and all that, that's good and therefore must be of the Spirit. But the reality is flesh could be both. Obviously, anything immoral, anything that's against who God is, the nature of God is of the flesh. But there's a lot of good things that people do that look good at least that are still flesh. Because flesh is not defined by the behavior, but rather the source. Think about it this way. When Jesus was walking this earth, right, there were two major groups. You had the sinners and the tax collectors, the people who were living in morality. And then you had another group of people who were the Pharisees, who were very religious, very upright, and very moral. They were doing everything they could to follow the law, even to the point where they would tithe their spices. I mean, imagine that, getting out the kitchen scale and measuring how much pepper you have, and then donating or giving 1/10 of that to the temple. That's what they were doing because they wanted to make sure that they were following all the laws, that they were obedient to everything. That's how serious and sincere they were. And yet Jesus said to them, you guys are like whitewashed tombs. What a great picture that is. Well, maybe not so great for them, but an accurate description of them. They were whitewashed. They were clean on the outside, moral and upright to the world around them. Everyone would admire them and many aspired to be them. But he says, you're whitewashed tombs. You're dead on the inside. And that's the problem. And so whether you're whitewashed tombs or you're dirty tombs, you're still dead. And that was the issue. That was the problem. And so the flesh can look bad. It can look good. It really is rooted in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And too often what we've done is we've tried to live out of the right side of the wrong tree. We just had to have more goodness, thinking that that would be okay, but it's the wrong tree. The tree of knowledge, good and evil only has one outcome, and that outcome is always death. There's no life to be found there. Life can only be found in the other tree, the tree of life. And so what is this flesh then? If it's not based on the behavior, it's also not my nature. And that's the other problem with that term, sinful nature. See, the translators of the NIV Bible, what they did is they try to interpret. They try to help out the reader by translating this word. The Greek word was sarx, and it literally just means flesh. And sometimes that is just referring to the physical body. But other times, and the context will tell us, it's referring to this way of living. It's referring to this enemy we have that is warring with our soul. And so I think it's helpful for us to have a definition of what the flesh is. So here's going to be our working definition through this series to help us understand what is it that this flesh is and why is it that we're having such a battle with it. But I would define it this way, that the flesh wars against us in order that we would attempt to find life the best way we can, independent of God. So it's trying to find life the best way I can, whether it be, to perform well or not perform well, whatever I can, to find that love, to find that acceptance, to find that security. Remember, that's what life really is to us now. It's that sense of what fills us up in our spirit and our soul, to be valued and significant. And the flesh is offering us solutions to that. But what's unique or key to the flesh isn't whether it's moral or immoral. It's without God. That's what defines the flesh. And so that's really what I have. I've got two options now to live. I can live as a believer. I can live according to trusting Jesus and relying upon him to be my source. Or I could choose to go it on my own and find life out of the flesh. And what the flesh will be doing is it's basically got three motives, three forms in which it's trying to present itself. Number one, it's going to offer to us a way to earn or gain life through our performance in what we do. Number two, it's going to protect us from losing what we have, what little life we have. Or number three, it's going to offer us comfort through either numbing or escaping the pain that we currently have. All right, let's take a longer look at each of those, starting with that first one of earning or performing for life. Let's think what that might look like, right? So let's start with someone who maybe is like a superstar. I mean like the truly greats of all time in terms of those athletes, right? So let's start with the Michael Jordans or the Wayne Gretzkys of this world. What does this world do with those people who are gifted athletically, gifted in their body in such a way that they have just incredible skill? What does the world do with those people? We elevate them. We idolize them. We worship them. Right? I mean, these guys, they walk into a stadium, an arena, and people chant their name and cheer for them. People buy their jerseys with their name on their back. The kids put up posters in their room celebrating these people. People scream and they shout wanting autographs and selfies with these athletes, even to the point now where they're no longer playing the sport, but they're still recognized as the greats. How do you think these people feel? with all that cheering, with all that adulation, with all that celebration, I bet you they feel loved and approved and valued and significant. See, what they're doing is they're taking their physical attributes, their physical abilities, and translating that into satisfying their deepest needs in their spirit. Problem is, it only works as long as they're successful. It only works as long as they're able to perform. And the moment that performance begins to drop, they begin to lose out and miss out on experiencing that love and that acceptance and that significance because it's still rooted in their performance. Well, what about those people who aren't gifted athletically, but rather they're gifted with beauty by the world's standards? I mean the supermodels of this world. Right? They have all the right shapes and all the right curves and all the right proportions and all the right coloring and all the right places. What do we do with those people? Well, we celebrate them as well. We put them up on magazines and in billboards and in TV commercials and programs and movies and everyone admires them. And if it's a beautiful woman, then all the guys want to be with her and all the women want to be like her. And what she's doing is she's using her physical beauty as a way to find love and acceptance. That I'm loved because I'm beautiful. Hence the reason so much time, so much effort is spent in chasing after this ideal of perfect beauty. Because I'm only as loved as I am beautiful is the thinking. And that's what they're doing. They're using that physical appearance, trying to find love, trying to find acceptance, trying to find approval. Then you have a whole other group of people. They're born not with physical attributes that the world wants, but they're born with intellect, with smarts. I mean, the Albert Einsteins of this world. What do we do with those people? Same thing. Right? We elevate them. We admire them. We just think, wow, they're so smart. And they become rock stars because of how smart they are. And they too are finding their value and their significance based on their ability to think about complex problems that for us would be like rocket science, would be too much. And for them, it's like grade 3 algebra. And we just admire them for their intellect. And then you have another group of people who they're gifted within a tremendous discernment. Meaning they can look at a problem and quickly discover, here are the 4 things we need to do to solve it. We got to do this, this, and that. And they begin to lead people. And they naturally end up becoming presidents and prime ministers and CEOs and community activists and leaders. And people admire them and they follow them. And we look up to them. We call them guru and sages. And we just want to learn from them. And we follow their movements and we join their movements as they lead us. And they get their value and their significance out of their leadership and discernment abilities. And then you have a whole other group of people who are gifted emotionally, meaning they're able to connect with people on an emotional level. They often become the artists of this world, the songwriters, the performers, the actors and actresses. They create performances in a way that connects with people. And so maybe after some kind of a concert or a play, people come up to them and say, you touched me, you connected with me. And they find their significance and their value in that. There's a famous clip from an actress when she won her Oscar. She got up there and she says, "You love me. You really love me." See, what was she doing? She was connecting her ability to act and during how loved she was. But here's the problem with all of it. What happens when your next play, your next movie, your next season, your next shot, your next campaign that you lead doesn't work? All that you've built up, all of that value and that significance begins to crumble. Now, maybe at first it's like, well, everyone has an off day, everyone has a bad game, and we kind of dismiss it, but you get a bit of a record of failure, and suddenly it's not good enough. Or maybe you have a failure that's so big, it permanently stains and stands beside all the achievements. We see that today where statues from past leaders are being torn down and names are being taken off of buildings because of their record included their failures. See, the problem is no matter how good your performance is, it's never going to be enough, especially for people like us, people who aren't the superstars and the rock stars and the geniuses and so forth. See, what do? We just do the best we can with what we got. And maybe I don't have the athletic ability to make it pro, but maybe I could be really good in high school or really good in college, and people will admire me for my athletic abilities. Or maybe I'll never be a supermodel. Maybe I can exercise and get the right clothes and the right outfits and the right makeup and the right hairstyles and colors that frame my face. And maybe then I'll be okay. Or maybe if I just work really hard and I sacrifice my body in such a way that I just keep working and working and working and working, and then maybe I'll find something that I'm good at, that I have value as. That you will admire my abilities because I'm really good at programming, or I'm really good at creating this. And so we just try the best we can. And when that doesn't work, now we start to get a little bit more desperate. And so then our performance isn't so good anymore. Not so moral, at least. I mean, we want it to be moral, and ideally that would be great, but at some point it's not enough. And so now I begin to compromise my values. And so maybe we begin to sleep with that boyfriend or girlfriend, trading sex for love. See, often it's been said that men will trade love for sex and women will trade sex for love, but the reality is both are trading sex for love. They just do it in different ways. See, for the lady, she's saying, if I sleep with him, then afterwards he'll love me. But the guy, he's just thinking, if I sleep with her, then in that moment, she'll love me. And so we start turning to things like sex. Maybe I'll turn to illicit relationships. Maybe I need to lie. I got to kind of put on this mask, this facade that maybe if you see something else, see what I think you want to see, then maybe I'll be okay then. And so we put on these masks and this performing and just behaving, hoping that I'll fit in, that you won't find out the real me. Because if you ever knew the real me, you wouldn't want me around, and I'd be gone. And so I got to hide that from you. And then so we become more desperate and more in trouble. And so we're trying to wear the right clothes, and we're trying to fit in, and we're trying to find the right group of friends and the right people to hang out and get their approval and their likes and have so many friends on social media and retweets and so forth. And then maybe then I'll have value. And we're doing all these things trying to perform. But again, it'll never be enough. Because no matter how hard you strive, no matter how fast you run, how high you jump, how many likes you get, there's always going to be someone out there with more. There's always going to be someone out there who's greater, and you're always going to be left feeling empty. And here's why. Because no matter what you do in your performance, the love, the acceptance, the respect, the approval that comes your way doesn't actually go to you. It just goes to the mask. It goes to the performance. And you're left still hungry and thirsty for life. So we go to the next thing. And the next thing we said is that the flesh will often then look to protect. And so what happens is I realize that I'm not going to maybe advance. I'm not going to get further in certain things, but then I can't lose what I've got. And so I got to protect myself, meaning that I got to make sure that you don't hurt me, that you don't come after me, you don't reject me, that I don't face more hurts and more difficulties. And so I begin to control everything around me. You know, it's interesting about the aspect of control. I've yet to meet the person who doesn't try to control everyone around them to some degree. Every one of us, I think, is trying to control everything around us. Because if I can control you, then I won't get overwhelmed. That you won't see my flaws, my shortcomings, my faults. You won't see what I believe to be true of me. But not only that, you won't hurt me because I won't let you. I'm in control. You can't reject me. You can't take away my value, my worth. You can't abandon me. And if you do, it's okay because I chose that. I'm still in control. And so we're using all kinds of things, manipulation, anger, sex, whatever we can, trying to control people and everything around me. But the reality is any control we have is an illusion. It doesn't work. And so what ends up happening is we resort to now protecting ourselves with space and distance. We keep you at a distance and don't let you in, hoping that will keep me safe. Maybe that will protect me. And we erect these barriers, these walls, in order to keep the hurt out. And it can be somewhat successful in the sense that maybe others can't lob in their hurt and their rejection, but it's guaranteed a failure in the sense that it keeps some of the hurt out, but it also keeps all of the love out. And because that love isn't able to get to you, you're guaranteed to experience rejection. You're guaranteed to experience the lack of love. And so you're guaranteed to be hurting. And so all your efforts of protection, all your efforts of controlling those around you just leave you more alone. It's like drinking salt water, hoping that it'll quench your thirst. It just leaves you more thirsty. It just doesn't work. And so now I'm left to hide my problems. I'm left to, hopefully you don't see those issues, and I'm to bury them, and so you don't come after me for those things. And when all my attempts to protect myself aren't enough, they don't actually soothe the pain that I'm feeling or have from my past, or just the loneliness that I'm experiencing as a result of all those boundaries, now I got to find some way to comfort that pain. I got to find some way to just feel better in the moment. And so now I'm going to try to numb, or I'm going to try to run away and escape the pain. And maybe I turn to food, and I just begin to overeat, because in that moment of eating ice cream, I just feel better in that moment. Or maybe I just try to run away to a Netflix or a movies or books. You see, the reality is Netflix is not new in our numbing. It just becomes the latest in a long attempts. You see, before Netflix, there were the TV shows and the soap operas. And before that, there were the movies. And before that, there was radio programs. And before that, there were books. And long before there were any books, there was our imagination, where we would fantasize, if only I was someone else, if only I was someone different. And it becomes the ultimate escape from me and my pain. Or then maybe we begin to numb our pain through alcohol, or through illicit drugs, or maybe even prescription drugs, just so I don't have to feel what I'm feeling. Just feels icky, feels uncomfortable. And so we just try to numb it. We try to run away. Maybe we leave relationships, divorce our spouse, thinking that will fix all my problems, only to discover that I bring all my problems with me because I get the problems in the divorce, and then some on top of it now. So no matter what I do, my performance is never enough. My protection is never solid enough. And there's nothing I can do to comfort to deal with this pain. And the reason for that is, as Jesus says in John chapter 6 and verse 63, that the flesh profits nothing. The flesh can't be the answer. The flesh will never satisfy me. And so there's no hope in that. Just like, again, that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, no matter how much good I have and how much evil I try to prune away, that tree will only have one outcome: more death, more emptiness, more despair. And so here's what ends up happening. That first sin in the garden resulted in great shame for mankind. And we've been dealing with that shame through the flesh, through performing, through protection, and through comfort ever since. But since it doesn't work, I often feel more shame. I feel shame for my failures. I feel shame that I just can't seem to overcome my problems. I feel shame for the rejection that I'm experiencing, or I feel shame for the sinful choices I've chosen to comfort my pain. And so, whereas that first sin led to shame, shame leads to sin, which leads to more shame, more sin, more shame, more sin. It's this cycle that I can't get out of because it just feeds into one another. And so fixing our behaviors isn't going to change it because it's not really our behaviors. That's the problem. See, Paul tells us this in Galatians chapter 5 and verses 19 to 21. And he gives us this list of what the flesh looks like. Read it with me here. He says the acts or the deeds of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft. That word for witchcraft is actually the Greek word pharma, where we get pharmaceuticals from, drugs. So witchcraft doesn't necessarily mean, satanic worship. It might even include drug use, turning to marijuana, turning to alcohol, turning to psychedelics, trying to feel better. Hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. When you look at that list, how many things in your life can you kind of relate to? If we're honest, we can all relate to some of it. Because the reality is, becoming a Christian doesn't take away the problem of the flesh. See, before you were saved, actually, you had no problem with the flesh because that's all you had. And the flesh just dominated you, which is why you weren't too concerned about your sin. But now that you're saved, now there's this battle. Now there's this war going on, as Galatians 5:17 talks about, between the flesh and the spirit. And so we're struggling, listening to the flesh, following the flesh. But notice this, Paul says this: the actions of the flesh, or the deeds of the flesh. So I want you to understand, our problem is not what the flesh looks like. How often have people looked at that list and they've said, see, I've got this anger problem, or I've got this sexuality problem. I keep having affairs, or I struggle with pornography, or I struggle with lying, or I struggle with alcohol. And we think, I need to overcome that problem. I need to overcome my anger. I need to overcome my pornography. And I want you to hear this. As Christians, we don't have anger problems. We don't have pornography problems. We don't have alcohol problems. That's not to say we don't struggle with those things from time to time as Christians. It's just that's not the source of the problem. See, Paul says it's the actions of the flesh, or the deeds of the flesh. What if we translated it this way? The symptoms of the flesh. See, it's just the symptom. It's not the problem. If you walked into your doctor's office and you said, doctor, I've got this tumor. As a result of this tumor, it's causing me blurry vision and headaches and dizziness. And if the doctor were to say to you, no problem, we can fix this. Here's some aspirin or Tylenol for your headache. And here's some new glasses for the blurry vision. And here's a cane to help you with your dizziness. What kind of a doctor is that? It's not a good one. Because all that doctor is doing, he's just treating the symptoms. He's not actually treating the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is the tumor. See, what if you could go in such a way to take out the tumor and relieve the pressure that tumor is causing? it would probably deal with the headaches and the blurry vision and the dizziness. Well, the same thing. God isn't primarily concerned with your symptoms. Yeah, your symptoms, the behavior, the choices that we make, they're hurting you, they're hurting those around you. It's not that he doesn't care about those things. But he knows that to truly help you, to truly have you experience the redemption that he's offering to us, means looking beyond the behavior and dealing with the root problem. And the root problem is I'm trusting in the flesh. I'm listening to the flesh as it's trying to lead me to find life apart from him. They're trying to overcome the death that all of us experience in this sin-cursed world. And so the solution, God says, is not through the flesh, but allowing me to overcome the flesh so that you can find life in me. And that's what we want to discover next. We want to discover next what God has done so that we can find life in him rather than trying to find it as best we can out of the flesh. And this next video is going to be the single most important thing we learn in this series. Can't wait to share it with you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode on the flesh. Well, as much as anyone could enjoy talking about the flesh. Fortunately, the good news is coming. In our next episode, we're going to understand God's answer for all this. How does Jesus set us free from living after the flesh? It's going to be great. In fact, it's the best message in this whole series. And before you go and check that out though, please go ahead and subscribe and like, and most importantly, share this video with other people. We want as many people to come to know freedom in Jesus. And if you're led, please go ahead and support this ministry financially with a gift at crosswayslife.org. Other people have supported us, allowing us to make these videos and offer them for free, and we want to continue to do that as best we can. Till next time.